Mr. Nelson. Call your next witness.
We'll have one more witness. We'll call Mr. Brian Grabowski, G-R-A-B as in boy, O-W-S-K-I.
Sir, if you can please turn towards me, raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you'll provide will be the truth?
I do.
Just a second.
Yes, ma'am.
And there is a microphone to the right of you. You can move it and put it in your lap.
Oh,
Give me 1 second, Mr. Nelson.
certainly.
And you can begin.
Thank you. Would you say your name again for the record, please?
My name is Brian, B-R-I-A-N, Grabowski, G-R-A-B-O-W-S-K.
And Mr. Grabowski, how are you employed?
I'm employed with the Michigan State Police as a forensic scientist assigned to the Firearms Homework Unit at the Metropolitan Detroit Laboratory.
Okay, so let's start off with a forensic technician or forensic scientist. What does that do?
My duties as a forensic scientist in the Firearms Homework Unit is to analyze evidence that comes in from various police departments and try to determine a common source in regards to fired evidence, components like fired bullets, fired cartridge cases, as well as firearms.
And have you received any specialized training for your role as a forensic scientist?
Yes, I have. To become a forensic scientist, first you need a 4 years bachelor's degree, which I have from the University of Findlay in forensic science. I've also received 2 years of training for a firearms examiner, which consisted of practical exercises, research, as well as competency tests as I went along my training to ensure that I was doing my examinations properly. I've also completed trajectory training, serial number restoration training, and gunshot residue training.
So 4 years undergraduate, 2 additional years, and then additional courses above and beyond that.
Yes, sir.
Do you have to maintain any type of proficiency?
Yes, we're proficiency tested at least twice a year, which I've completed every year that I've been an examiner for scientists and completed actively.
And if you mentioned, forgive me, I forgot, how long have you been a forensic scientist?
I've been a forensic scientist approximately 8 years. My first 4 years of career was as a forensic technician.
And you said, so 8 years on the job and
Two
certifying every twice a year?
Yes, proficiency tested twice a year.
So a total of 16 times that you've been proficiency tested, roughly.
More like 12. The first 2 years as a forensic scientist, I was in training.
I see, okay. Have you had a chance to testify in criminal proceedings?
Yes, I testified as an expert in over 30 to 35 cases.
Okay. And that was as an expert?
Yes.
So, Your Honor, at this time, I would turn over the witness to defense counsel for voir dire as to expert qualifications.
All right, Mr. Coleman, your witness.
Is it Detective Sergeant Grabowski?
No, I'm a civilian employee. I'm just,
So these training, you go on seminars?
most of it was training in-house. The 2-year training program to be a forensic scientist and to be a firearms examiner was mostly done in-house.
When you say in-house, that's in at Michigan State Police?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, I would partner with a senior examiner, my lieutenant or supervisor at the time, and I would essentially shadow him and perform independent examinations in which he would check my work to verify that I was doing it accurately. The secondary trainings that I obtained, gunshot residue, serial number restoration, shooting reconstruction, those have all been external trainings in which I had performed them or completed them either with a outside company or at seminars.
Is there a particular company name that you can tell us about?
One of my external tool mark trainings that was with Forensic Assurance.
Sure. That's a private company that contracts various state and local agencies.
Yes, sir. Yeah, they actually, their main duty is to create proficiency tests, and they are distributed worldwide. However, he also the owner of the company has a background in firearm and tool mark examinations, so he provides trainings.
Where is this particular company? Michigan?
This particular company is actually located in Northville.
No. Okay, good. So we look to local company.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so that's one of the companies. And you had other external seminars and training?
Yes, my shooting reconstruction was given by Matt Nodell of Nodell Scientific, and I believe he's actually out of Washington, the state of Washington. Other trainings, my serial number restoration training.
You were sent out to Washington State?
No, the Michigan State Police brought him in to, it's cheaper to lodge him here and
I did.
give training to multiple people than to send us all the way out to Washington.
So you've had that. Recently, what have been some of the seminars?
My most recent training, I believe, I went out to federal ammunition and observed how ammunition components are actually made.
Where is federal located?
Federal is located, forgive me, I don't remember the exact city, but it's outside of Minneapolis,
It's a
Minnesota.
manufacturer, it's a manufacturer, it's not a training business.
Correct,
Where you can buy a box of ammunition, it's federal ammunition.
correct.
So you've gone there on occasion fairly recently to observe how that ammunition is manufactured.
Correct.
And how does that help you in honing your skills?
Well, it helps by allowing us to determine how the manufacturing process is created on fired bullets and fired cartridge cases, which allow us to determine if there are any manufacturing marks imparted on those components during our examination. If we observe manufacturing marks on the fire evidence that we observe, we can determine that it's not from the firearm, but actually from the manufacturing process.
So it helps you distinguish prior bullets, so to speak.
Correct. Yes.
If that's proper terminology. But whether that bullet is been from a particular manufacturer.
Not necessarily a particular manufacturer, but in order to determine that the marks left on the fire components are from the actual firearm instead of the manufacturing process of making those components.
So as opposed to particular maker of that particular not firearms, shell, the bullets. People, when you get the bullets from, you're not saying you can determine when you get the bullets from, but it comes from a particular manufacturer of ammunition.
Correct.
But as it relates to a particular weapon, that ammunition may be fired from.
That's correct.
So it's not manufacturer specific, it's firearm.
Correct.
Judge, I have no other questions.
All right, thank you. Mr. Knight.
Your Honor, after the one year by defense counsel, the people would move the court to have Mr. Grabowski testify as an expert in the area of firearms and specifically tool marks.
Judge, for the purposes of the exam, no objection.
All right, thank you. Mr. Grabowski will be recognized as an expert in the firearms and tool marks.
And is that an accurate representation of your area of expertise, firearms and tool marks?
Yes.
So when you get evidence from a detective or a police agency, specifically a shell casing or a fired bullet, how do you determine that it was fired from a gun or from a different gun?
So the first thing I'll do if I receive multiple components of ammunition is I will analyze them to determine if they have similar class characteristics. The class characteristics are the general characteristics of a firearm or fired ammunition that the manufacturer intends to place on the gun or the ammunition components. For example, caliber, the size and shape of the firing pin, the shape of the aperture, which is the hole that the firing pin comes out of. Different manufacturers utilize different shaped apertures. In regards to fired bullets, I will look at the number of lands and grooves, which are the kind of ridges and valleys that are cut into a barrel during manufacturing to give the bullet a spin as it travels down the barrel. Those are all general characteristics that the manufacturer intends to put on the gun, which are then imparted onto the fired components. If they do have similar class characteristics, I will move to my microscopic examination point of my analysis, in which I will, if I have a gun like I had in this case, I will test fire the weapon for two reasons. One, to determine functionality of the firearm. The second, to gain exemplars from that gun that I can then compare to the fired evidence that I received in the case. So I will look at my test shots first in order to determine the replicating marks that are being left from that firearm. I will then compare the test shots to the fired evidence in order to determine if there is sufficient agreement for an identification to be made.
So, and I guess you get a gun from an agency and you test fire it. If it's, say, well, once you test fire it, you have a sample fired shell casing, and you have a sample projectile.
Correct. Two. We always take at least two test shots.
I see, okay. And from those, is that kind of your template to work from? Is that?
Yes.
Okay. So in this particular case that you're here on, did you receive any evidence?
I did.
And there were a number of pieces of evidence, is that correct?
Yes.
And those were over 3 different cases.
That is correct.
Was there overlap between all 3 of those cases?
I'm sorry, I don't understand the question.
Was there any commonality between the 3 cases and some of the items that you, I guess I'm not looking for your conclusion, but were there
similarities in class characteristics?
like, did you receive a gun?
Yes, I did.
And was that gun part of 3 different investigations? They have 3 different police report numbers.
Not at time of submission. However, in our submission form, it was indicated that there was a NIBIN, which is the National Integrated Ballistic Information Network lead, in regards to 3 different cases.
So you got some preliminary information that let you know that that gun might be associated with other cases.
Correct.
And how many reports did you prepare that were connected to that gun?
I prepared 6 total reports, one individually for each case, and then the second report that I had prepared for each case was essentially a duplicate for all 3 cases, but it detailed all of the results in regards to the commonality of the 3 cases.
And do you recall off the top of your head that when you prepare a report, does it have an MSP lab report number?
Yes, it does.
Do you remember the report numbers for these 3 cases?
Mary David 20-1199, Mary David 20-1200, and Mary David 20-1201.
Okay. Now I want to talk about Mary David 20-1200. Do you know which case that is connected to?
I believe that, as in the evidence that I received?
Correct.
I believe the evidence I received for that case was 1 fired 140 Smith & Wesson caliber fired cartridge case and 7 fired bullets.
And now I want to talk about the case report number that ends in 1201. Do you remember what physical evidence you received on that particular case?
I received 2 40 Smith & Wesson caliber fired cartridge cases and a 40 Smith & Wesson Beretta Model 96 semi-automatic pistol.
You received an actual gun in that case.
That is correct.
And you said you received a number of different, that you made a number of different reports. 2 reports for each one of those cases that you mentioned. 1199, 1200, and 1201. Each of those cases has 2 reports.
Correct.
Record number 1, so the next couple pages. So record number 2, so that should be the next couple pages. Your turn over 1, 2, got it. Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
Okay.
Please let the record reflect that I'm handing the witness what has been previously marked as People's Proposed Exhibit number 7. Do you recognize what I've handed you?
This is the report that I prepared for Mary David 1200, record number 2.
Okay. And the, can you give, and do you recognize the, is your signature anywhere on this report?
Yes, it is on the final page of the report after my conclusions.
And the final page, this is 3 pages?
Correct.
And you recognize this as the report that you prepared?
Correct.
Now, you mentioned a moment ago that each one of those cases, Mary David 1199, 1200, 1201, you said they all had 2 reports, so report number 1 and report number 2.
Correct.
Is this one report number 1 or 2 for that 1200 case?
2.
And so this is the report that you authored?
Correct.
Your Honor, at this time I would move for the admission of People's Proposed number 7 as People's number 7.
You need a direction?
For purposes of this examination, only, no objection.
People's number 7. Report. Mary David 1200, record 2.
So this has to do with report, what is the EPD case number that is associated with this report 1200? Can you determine that?
It is 200-606-0324.
And what items did you examine that came specifically from that report?
Can I check my notes?
If that would help.
So for record number 2 for Mary David 20-1200, I examined the firearm from Mary David-1201, item 13 from Mary David-1199, the 2 fired bullets from Mary David-1199, and all of the fired bullets from Mary David 1200. Oh, as well as the fired cartridge case from Mary David 20-1200.
Okay. So I guess, and I'm going to hand you back this. If you look at page 2, that gives a list of evidence from MD 20-1200.
Yes, sir.
And item 1 item 2, item 3, item 4, item 5, item 6, item 7, item 8. Those were all associated with DPV case number 2006-06-0324.
Correct.
Okay. And item 1 is a .40 caliber shell casing,
Correct.
and
Items 2 through 8 are all fire bullets.
okay. Now, you also said, and that's further down also on page 2, is evidence from 1201.
Correct.
And item 2A is a .40 caliber Smith & Wesson gun, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
It's a 40 caliber, 40 Smith & Wesson caliber fire. It's not a Smith & Wesson fire.
I'm not sure what the difference is.
Right, so cartridges are given a specific caliber name, so that the actual name of the cartridge is a 40 Smith & Wesson caliber cartridge.
Okay.
It's similar to a 38 Special or a 9mm Luger. The name of the cartridge is a 40 Smith & Wesson cartridge. However, the firearm that I received was a Beretta Model 96. But you can fire 40 Smith & Wesson cartridges in many different manufactured firearms chambered for 40 Smith & Wesson caliber cartridges.
I see, okay. Now, if you would turn to page 3 and read your conclusions from your examinations of those items that were taken from the 1200 case and how they compare to that firearm, that 40 caliber actual gun that you tested.
Of just 1200?
Yes.
Item 1, which is the fired cartridge case, is identified as having been fired in item 2A, which is the pistol that I received on 1201. And item 2 of MD 20 1200 was identified as having been fired from the pistol that I received on 1201.
And I guess I got a little ahead of myself. How did you receive these particular items when they first came to you for testing?
So when they're submitted to the lab, they go through our front counter. We have evidence technicians and secretaries there to checking the evidence. They log in all the administrative relevant information to the case into our system, and then they put it into storage. I go into storage when that case is up in the rotation to examine and pull it from storage. Is that what you're referring to, or do you mean the physical nature of how I receive the items of what you're?
No, that's fine. So they're received, they're put in storage, and then you have access to the storage when it's time for you to go through examination.
Correct.
And then, once you take them out of storage, can you explain to us what you did in this case, how they were packaged? Did they have evidence tags attached to them? How do you know what pieces you're looking at?
Yeah, so all of the containers that were received or submitted by the police agency had an agency tag number associated with it. I will detail that in my report and in my evidence breakdown to keep track of which evidence goes to which container. We also put container labels at time of submission on the containers to kind of track the evidence as it goes through the lab process. I will also initial and put the item numbers on the containers, so I know what items go with what containers. And then we break down the evidence in our computer system, basically detailing how the evidence was received and what type of container, what was inside of that container, and then eventually the evidence that is inside that container as well.
And some of that information gets translated to your report. For example, out of report 1200, item 1 says that it was a tape sealed envelope containing another tape sealed manila envelope.
Correct.
Okay. And so like the tape sealed evidence envelope, DPD item 3, that is what DPD filled out?
Well, No, I fill out everything that's on my report, so I describe everything. So what I received was a larger outer container, larger manila envelope container with a DPD tag next to that. Detroit Police Department puts their own evidence tag on, and then we put our evidence labels that we use internally at the lab on those containers. When I opened that evidence envelope, there was a smaller manila envelope, like a coin envelope inside of that with ultimately what was the evidence that needed to be examined inside of that.
So, I guess cutting to the chase, after all of this, the 40 caliber shell case that was recovered in the 1200 case, which is DPD case number 2006060324, item number 1 attached to that report number, was that fired from the gun that you examined?
Yes, it was.
Item 2 from that same report number, which was a fired bullet, was, in your opinion, was that fired from that gun that you examined?
Yes, and ultimately, if you refer to the past reports that I authored, items 2 and item 7 were fired from that fire. Items 3, 4, 5, 6, and 8 were inconclusive, which means they were not identified or eliminated as having been fired from the firearm, so that means that they could have, but they also did not have.
And the items that were inconclusive, those were all fired bullets.
Correct.
And why might they be inconclusive?
To my knowledge, those were lead bullets, which, due to the softness and malleability of lead, they can eradicate tool marks easier and pick up more tool marks that might obscure those left from the firearm. So they were very difficult to examine. There just wasn't enough information there for me to make a conclusion.
Your Honor, no further questions at this moment.
Thank you. Cross-examination.
So, first off, the knife, you can get various hits on a particular firearm, knife, is that what we're saying?
So Detroit Police Department does their own NIDA entries, and I believe the correlations come from a centralized location in Alabama that is staffed by the ATF. So the ATF will send, Detroit Police Department will enter in fired cartridge cases and test fired cartridge cases from firearms. The Correlation Center in Alabama will notify them if there is a potential match. If there is a potential match, because it cannot be verified unless it is physically examined, they will then send us the evidence to physically examine, and we will determine if there is a match.
So knifing is really just a preliminary process.
That's correct.
Now, in this particular case, you received, I think, you specified 8 pieces or 8 pieces of evidence. Am I correct?
For Mary David 20-1200, I received, yes, 1 fired cartridge case and 7 fired bullets.
And 7 fired bullets. Now, out of the 8, you only, and then there was the Mary David 1201.
Yes.
Which would be part of that. I think it was 2A.
Yes, that was the lab number that I received the firearm under, as well as 2 fired cartridge cases.
When you receive these pieces, this evidence, you don't know where it comes from.
Like physically the crime scene?
That's right.
Correct, no.
So you don't know, you did not, in this particular case, go out and otherwise collect these pieces of evidence. So you're not here to testify as to where they came from.
No, sir.
And in fact, your chain of evidence, so to speak, starts once it gets to your particular location.
Yes, sir.
So you received cartridge container 1, which also contained item 1, which was a 40 caliber Smith the spear. Now, the spear, the manufacturer of the ammunition manufacturer?
Correct, we call it the marketer because different manufacturers will outsource their productions just because they get backlogged or something like that. So yeah, it's essentially the manufacturer, but we call it the marketer of the ammunition.
All right, the spear, so the spear is, would it be from, I don't know any manufacturer names, is there particular manufacturer names?
It's Spear, that's the brand of ammunition.
That's the brand.
Yes,
Okay. And national, would that be also the brand?
federal,
Federal.
correct, yes.
So the cartridge in container one was you that is identified, and that's DPD item 3.
Correct.
Having been fired from MD 20-1201 item 2.
Correct.
Now, again, you don't know where DPD item 3 came from.
That's correct.
There's no indication whether it came from one part of the city or another.
I believe on their property tag, they list where it came, like the crime scene that it came from. However, they usually don't record that information. In all cases, I don't record that information because it's not necessary for my examination. I just look at the evidence.
Okay, so I guess the conclusion that I'm asking for is you don't know where this evidence came from.
No, I do not.
Okay. And the evidence that is presented to you, and I think you explained in some manner, MD 20-12-1200 all come from the same crime scene? Or can you testify to that?
Again, without reading the best I would be able to do to determine location of where those came from is read the property tags. I didn't package the evidence. All I got, first time I saw that evidence was when I received it out of storage at the MSP lab.
So, okay. Now, couple things. Items, and I'm looking at your report. So you actually had two separate reports. Report number 1 and report number 2. Now, the report number 2 is what we've been talking about. And that report was dated, I think, September 16th, 2020. Would that be correct?
Yes,
And that contains all 3, that is, MD 201-1199, MD 20-1200, and MD 1201.
correct.
But the report number 1, which is dated September 27th, 2020, only refers to this particular case, that is agency number, but it's MD 20-1200. Am I correct?
Yes,
And so those containers should correlate. The evidence received should be the same evidence received. The record number 1 has 8 containers of evidence. Am I correct?
yes,
And record number 2 likewise has 8 containers of evidence.
correct.
And those are the same 8 pieces of evidence
Correct.
submitted to you. Now, I think in record number 1, you also made references or results of physical/microscopic examination. Am I correct?
Correct.
And so items 2 and 7 were identified as having been fired from the same firearm?
Correct.
That's your testimony?
Yes.
But, and that's, record number 1 dated September 27th. And record number 2 dated September 16th. I don't see where you make reference to item number 7.
So how this case came in, because all 3 of the cases had not been previously examined, I treated each as an individual case. So I completed the comparisons for each individual case, and then took my best exemplars from each individual case and compared it to the firearm. So in the bottom of page 3, at the last statement of my results for record number 2, it says there may be additional evidence associated with this case. Please refer to any previously completed case records for the lab numbers listed above. Since items 2 and 7 were already identified as having been fired from the same firearm, it would have been redundant to say items 2 and 7 were fired from item 2A, since they were already identified as having been fired from the same firearm.
And again, that report number 1 that you just referred to actually references one dated September 16th, which you make that qualification.
Right, so I believe that, I'm not sure where that date comes from, because the date on the bottom of my signature block says October 4th, 2020.
Right.
I don't know if that's the date that the report was generated initially.
So who generates the report?
I do, I'm not sure when that report was initially generated.
So that report was dated October 4th, and that's the report number 2, record number 2, they completed September 16th. And then there's the record number 1, which they completed September 27th. That report was authored October 14th. Would that be fair to say?
Yes.
Now, in record number, when referring to record number 1, items, I think there's a reference, items 2 through 7 are consistent with being 40/10 millimeter caliber class fire bullets.
Correct.
Mr. Grabowski, what does that mean?
So a 40, the .40 measurement is the imperial measurement that America uses, but none of the rest of the world does. 10 millimeter is the metric version of .40, which the rest of the world uses. So there are several different cartridges that use that size bullet. Since we cannot identify a bullet as having come from a specific cartridge, we give it a caliber class. This caliber class is a 40/10 millimeter caliber class bullet.
So the bullet, now, could a 10 millimeter bullet fit into a 40 caliber case?
Yes, but a 10 millimeter cartridge could not be fired in a 40 Smith & Wesson caliber fire. The cartridge itself is too long.
Too long?
Yes. It wouldn't chamber.
10.
I'm sorry?
10 millimeter.
You could switch out the bullets, so you could take they're the same diameter.
Right.
That's what that measurement is. .40 is 0.40 inches diameter measurement. 10 millimeter is the metric version of .40. So they're the same diameter bullet.
And the same is true for the 9 millimeter /38.
Correct.
So, because I see here where you make reference to item number 8 as being consistent with being consistent, it is consistent with being a 38/9 millimeter caliber class fire class.
I'd have to read my report. I believe it says 38 9 millimeter or greater.
And you know.
Okay.
That is different or distinguished from the 40/10mm class. Should that be correct?
Well, the reason I couldn't give it a definitive caliber class is because it was poorly shaped and badly damaged, so I couldn't definitively give it a caliber class. So that's why I said 38. Based on the information I had, it was a 38 9mm caliber class or greater.
So it could have been fired from a 9mm class.
Yes,
Now, could a 9mm be fired from a 40?
yes,
40 caliber be fired from a 9mm? I mean, like, switch it up.
no,
It's like a 223 can be fired from a 5.56. Am I getting that right?
yes, the 223 can be fired from.
5.56. 5.56 cannot be fired from a 223.
Well, the difference there is powder pressure. So the diameter of the bullet is the same. If a 9mm was fired in a 40 Smith & Wesson firearm, the landing groove impressions would not be, there would be evidence there that it was fired in a larger caliber weapon.
You did not find that in this, that kind of, that kind of.
That would suggest that the item 8 was fired in a, I didn't, well, it may have been, but it also may have been fired in 38. I couldn't definitively say what caliber class it was. So if it was fired in a 38, if it was an actual 38 class bullet and fired in a 38, that would be consistent with what I saw. If it was a 40 class bullet and fired in a 40 caliber weapon, that would be consistent with what I observed. Based on my observations, it did not appear that it was a smaller bullet fired in a larger caliber weapon.
And I'm not trying to, the 9mm/38 could have also been fired from the 9mm.
Correct.
And that would be evidenced by perhaps even a 9mm casing found in the safe. If there was one found in the safe.
Perhaps.
No further questions?
Just quickly, and Your Honor, I apologize, I should have published this to you so you could have followed along. I do apologize for that.
Okay.
The, and may I publish to you, if you care?
Sure. Thank you.
Mr. Grabowski, the 40 caliber gun that you examined, did it fire, in your expert opinion, the 40 caliber shell casing that was DPD item 3 under DPD case number 2006-06-0324? I can repeat that if you like.
No, yes, it did.
It did.
Yes,
And that gun also fired the spent bullet, DPD on item number 5.
if that's my item 2 or 7, yes,
That is your item 2, DPD item 5.
correct.
I'm sorry,
That's on,
is that record 2 or record?
that's record 2, which has been entered into evidence.
Right.
I've got it right here if you look at that. Okay. So that 40 caliber gun fired that 40 caliber shell casing, and that 40 caliber gun fired that spent bullet.
Correct.
Nothing further here.
I have just a couple of questions. Is there a percentage or likelihood that you would say that gun fired showcase?
We don't have a percentage or likelihood ratio that we publish or have established. All of our conclusions are based on practical certainty, which means that we don't have the ability to test fire every single gun or examine every single gun that has ever been made and ever will be made. However, based on our training and experience, the tool marks that we've observed are we haven't found duplicating tool marks between firearms.
And you were asked a lot of questions on cross-examination about different type of guns that could fire certain ammunition. Correct?
Yes.
Would you need those type of guns to be able to say whether or not they fired ammunition that you were provided?
To identify to a specific gun, I would need that to test the ammunition. Yeah, I would, again, like this case, I would take test shots with that specific firearm. If I had like caliber ammunition, I would be able to identify or possibly identify a common source.
But you're telling us that the gun that you fired the two casings to Texas, right?
My testimony was that the firearm fired the fired bullet in the fired cartridge case.
The fired bullet. Thank you. Any questions based on the
Nothing based on that for the people.
No.
Thank you. You're awesome.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Any other witnesses on behalf of the people?
Your Honor, the people have no more witnesses at this time.
All right, thank you. Any witnesses on behalf of the defense?
No, Your Honor.
Yes.
Your Honor, the people would ask this court to bind over the defendant on all charges. I will just go through things quickly. It's been a long day so far. I don't want to make too much longer. Charge count 1, first-degree homicide, premeditated murder. We have a decedent that was found shot a number of times. We also have he was found inside a car on Lakeview Street in Detroit, and it's in the county of Wayne.
Mr. Nelson, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Can you please, I know that the medical examiner's report was admitted to people, can you please, let the court know who the author of the report was, what the cause of death was, who the decedent was?
Yes, I'm sorry. The manner of death was homicide. It was authored by Sarah Avid-Schmidt, A, V as in Victor, E, D as in David, S, C, H, M, I, D as in David, T. She's a medical doctor and assistant medical examiner. That was dated on June 24th, 2020. And it starts off that it is my opinion that the death was caused by multiple 4 gunshot wounds. Per investigation, the decedent was a 27-year-old male who was found shot in the driver's seat of his vehicle after a drive-by shooting. And then it concludes by saying the manner of death was homicide. So homicide by multiple gunshot wounds.
Decedent's name, please.
Raymond, R-A-Y-M-O-N-D as in David. Darnell, D-A-R-N-E-L-L. Mallory, M-A-L-L-O-R-Y. Thank you. So the medical examiner's report does determine that this was a homicide by 4 gunshot wounds specifically. We have testimony from the surviving victim that he was sitting in the decedent's silver Taurus station wagon when a red truck pulled up next to them, and there was a brief conversation. The truck pulled off, and a truck pulled back up, and shots were fired. The witness did say that he did not see any other trucks between the time that that first truck pulled off and the shots were fired. The complaining witness that was here that testified, Mr. Rayshawn Spiller, he testified that once he heard the shots, he left the passenger side and ran to the back of the house. That is confirmed by the evidence technician's testimony that said that she saw a trail of blood leaving from the passenger side. The technician said that there were actually five impacts to the driver's side door, four to the driver's side door, one to the B pillar, that would reflect shots being fired from the street. We also have Mr. Spiller gave a little bit of a vague description of the driver. He did say wearing a white shirt and a black hat. He did kind of want to qualify that and say that he was willing to say whatever he could to get out of that room. Your Honor, I put forth to the court that I think he was willing to say whatever he could today to get out of this room. And I think that clearly he did not want to be here. But I do find it interesting that when Mr. Morlett was arrested 2 days later, he was arrested wearing a white T-shirt and a black brimmed hat. So it could be pure coincidence, but it could also mean that Mr. Spiller's initial statement to the police was perhaps a little bit more accurate than what he testified to today. I'll leave that to the court. So then we also have firearm by possession of a firearm by a felon. We stipulated to the defendant's inability to possess a gun based on the testimony from Mr. Spiller, although he did not see he did not identify Mr. Morlett, he did not identify seeing a gun, but it is a reasonable conclusion that that gun was in that car, and that car was driven by Mr. Morlett. And that would also go towards the carrying and concealed. So then I would want to look at the testimony of Officer Amanda Hudgens. And 2 days after this shooting, actually more like maybe 28, 29 hours after this shooting, she pulled over a burgundy car, a burgundy Yukon. This defendant was seated in the passenger side of that seat of that car. After he exited and that vehicle was searched, she found underneath his seat that he had just been occupied a few minutes earlier, a .40 caliber weapon. I'm going to go back to the evidence technician. She testified, Ms. Shepard testified, that she recovered a .40 caliber shell casing along with some spent bullets from that scene. She testified that she did not do a thorough examination inside the car. That may have been done elsewhere at an impound lot. She did recover a .40 caliber spent casing and a spent projectile. Then we also have Sergeant Ford pulled video in that area and saw that a vehicle similar to the defendant's vehicle, one that he even acknowledged to Detective Johnson, is at least looks similar. He didn't say that is mine. He didn't say it isn't mine. He just says it looks similar. Then we have a phone number that is associated. It's not listed under Mr. Morlett's phone number, but as defense counsel pointed out, in the city of Detroit, phone numbers are often registered to people that aren't the actual possessor. So I might have.
Not just in the city of Detroit.
Exactly, but I believe that those are the words that Mr. Pullman used, and you are correct. Somebody can have a phone that's registered to their mother, to their father, to their friend, whatever. But the important factor is that this phone number is associated with Mr. Morlett, and then we heard from Detective Schmelter that did an analysis of that and found that at least that phone number was in the area of the shooting on this particular day at the specific area and time and location. So based on, and then finally we have Mr. Grabowski who testified in his expert opinion. The handgun that was recovered from the defendant's seat that he was riding in fired the shell casing that was recovered from the scene, as well as the spent projectile that was recovered from the scene. And that's based on his expert opinion. And to put his expert opinion in layperson's terms, the fingerprints, so to speak, from those shell casings match that gun. So with that, Your Honor, people do believe that there is, to a probable cause standard, proof that this defendant committed these crimes on this particular day in Wayne County. and we would ask the court to find over on all charges. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, as it relates to Spiller, he can testify to anything, and he actually indicated, as the court understands and as our prosecutor understands, he didn't even want to be here. His testimony is worthless. So if you're saying or suggesting that he identified somebody with a black hat and a white t-shirt, I think it was Officer Hudkins who testified that the driver of the vehicle, where the gun was found, had a white t-shirt and a dark black hat, baseball style hat. So Spiller's testimony, I would suggest, is worthless. You can't even suggest that he saw a red truck, and he certainly didn't identify what kind of truck it was. So Spiller's, I would say, should not be considered. Then we have Schmelter, who does the phone check. Mind you, that phone is not in my client's name, and while the detective testified that there was some class of investigation or some investigation process, his name, he is related to that phone. There's no real testimony as to how or what that relation is. I mean, you say that, well, we have an investigation and there's a process, and this process revealed that he was associated with this phone, without more. That does not connect him to that phone. But even if you want to connect him to that phone, that, I think Detective Smelter testified that could have came off of any particular address in a fairly wide radius of that part of the city. And in fact, I asked him about a particular address, which was 3 or 4 blocks away, and he admitted it could have anything within 10 blocks. So at this count, Detective Smelter's testimony is right. It does not put him there on the scene. The video or the picture, that is time-stamped. I think the sergeant for testifying was 8:10. 8:10, not 8:25 when this incident was called in. Testified. That's 15 minutes. So you have a vehicle that if you suggested it to my clients, it's not there at the time of the shooting. Now, I do realize that he said there was no video played before this court. That was the only evidence produced, was that time-stamped picture. So anything else was not corroborated by evidence produced before this court. The only thing produced was that particular picture, time-stamped at 8:10. The gun. We don't have anything, but it was taken from a vehicle. And we really don't have evidence about that particular vehicle, other than my client was in it at the time. But he wasn't driving. So there is a lack of connection. Where are we connecting the dots to suggest or infer that my client is involved in this shooting? Finally, and I think most important, that evidence collected, we don't know where it came from. The evidence check testified to 3, I think if I recall correctly, it's 9mm case shell casing, that was Schwab, that was 2. There was I strike that, a live 9mm bullet that was taken into custody in Schwab. And then the second one was a 40 cal shell, or that was item 3 in the evidence text report, which was Schwab for DNA. So that's 3 and 4. Item 5, I think, was a bullet, and then item 6 were keys. But where do those items link up to what Mr. Grabowski testified to? How do you link those particular items, the items that Mr. Grabowski testified to? We don't know where they came from, other than they came from a case. And Judge, may I say this? There were 8 items produced in MD-1200 in the 624 in the case referenced in this matter before this court. 8 items. Where did they come from? Where did they come from? There's been no testimony linking those items to the scene. Without that, there's nothing linking. If the court wants to infer, well, he's in a car and the pistol involved in this was under the seat in the car that he was riding in, how do you link those particular pieces of evidence that Mr. Grabowski testified to the evidence taken from the scene? Where does that come from? There's no testimony. There's no linkage. And for those reasons, there is no inference that my client is involved in this shooting. So I would object to the finding.
Any comments? Hello?
Your Honor, just a couple of things. The timestamp on the video, and I think you may still have that particular exhibit. Timestamp on that is 8:16 and 55 seconds. So roughly 8:17 p.m. on June 6, 2020. And Sergeant Ford just did testify that when he examined the system, he said it was roughly 5 minutes slow, which would put it at an actual time of about 8:21. And the call was recorded, I think, sometime like 8:26, 8:27. So the time frame is not 15 minutes off, as Mr. Coleman suggests, but just a matter of a few minutes off. And that's perfectly consistent with people witnessing something or hearing something and making phone calls to 911. So not 15 minutes, but more like 3 or 4 or 5 minutes, which is perfectly understandable. As far as the evidence technician, Charlene Shepard, when she testified, she made, and I'm looking at her report, which is what she referenced, she made, at the scene, she put 6 items in evidence: a 9mm live round, a swab from that, a DNA swab from that 9mm live round, which the people don't know where that came from. As Mr. Coleman points out, we don't know where that came from, but we do know that item 3 on her report, 2006-06-0324-3, was a Spear 40 caliber shell casing. And then she took a DNA swab from that, and then also item number 5, which was a suspected bullet. Then we have Detective Grabowski. When he analyzed those things, he testified in his expert opinion that the gun that was taken from Mr. Morlet's car fired that shell casing and fired that bullet. So it's true that Mr. Grabowski analyzed a bunch of other evidence, but those are other evidence from the two other cases that are related to that gun. So when Mr. Coleman says, where's all this other stuff? That's not relevant to what we're here for today. What we're here for today is the homicide that took place on June 6, 2020. And Mr. Grabowski analyzed evidence that was connected to that homicide. The 140 caliber shell casing, one spent bullet, and one gun that was retrieved 2 days later all match up. And all of that points to Mr. Morlett. So, Your Honor, based on that, again, if people would ask for line over on all counts.
All right, thank you. The court first received a stipulation from the parties that Mr. Morlett had previously been convicted of a felony and had not restored his rights to possess a firearm on the date in question. The court also received People's Number 1, which was a medical examiner's report. It was 11 pages long, and it was authored by Sarah Schmidt, Schmidt, who's an assistant medical examiner. She performed an autopsy on the body of Raymond Mallory on June 24th of this year. Sorry, the report was authored on June 24th of this year. And she concluded in her expertise that the cause of death was 4 gunshot wounds and the manner of death was homicide. The court heard from Rayshawn Spiller, who testified that on June 6th of this year, he was on Lakeview Street in the city of Detroit. He rode his bike to that location during the day. He was with his friend Ray, who he's known for a couple of years, but didn't know Ray's last name. He said Ray was in a white or silver station wagon, and the car was parked on the street. He said Ray was the driver, and that he had gotten in the front passenger seat of the vehicle, that they went to the gas station to get a phone charger. They were only at the gas station for a couple minutes. Ray went in the store, and they returned back to Lakeview. No one else was in the car with him. Lakeview's in the city of Detroit. He said that his head was down as he was in the passenger seat of the vehicle, and he got shot, and Ray got shot. He said he recalled seeing a red truck pull up. He heard words between Ray and the individual in that vehicle. Shots were fired. Ray and himself were hit. He said that he got out of the car and he was able to get to his bike. He was hit in the arm, chest, and lower stomach. He received medical treatment. He didn't recognize anyone in the court. He said that after the truck pulled off, he heard shots shortly thereafter. He didn't see any other trucks on the block, and he testified that he was not being honest about the description he provided to the police regarding the clothing and physical description of the individual associated with the truck. The court learned on cross-examination that the shooter was coming from Southampton and that the red truck was at some point facing Frankfurt. The court also heard from Charlene Shepard. She's a forensic technician with the Detroit Police Department for 5 years. She goes to crime scenes and she looks for evidence, writes reports regarding the evidence that she recovers. She said she went to 5250 Lakeview on June 6th with her partner, forensic technician Harriet. They arrived at about 9:50 p.m. The sun was setting. There was a fatal and non-fatal shooting scene. The police were there. She talked to officers and searched for evidence. She observed a Ford Taurus on the east curb with suspected projectile impact. There was a deceased victim in the vehicle. That individual was in the driver's side of the vehicle. She collected a 9mm live round and a .40 caliber shell casing, suspected bullet, a swab of DNA from the shell casing, and a live round. And she put all those items in a report ending in 0324 and listed them as items 1 through 6. She said the .40 caliber was found in the street on Lakeview, and that was item number 3. And item number 4 was also found in the street. Court heard from Officer Hudgens, who is a Detroit police officer for the past 3 years. On June 8th, in the early morning hours, she was on patrol with her partner in a fully marked scout car. She was dressed in a full uniform, and there was a bolo. Be on the lookout for a vehicle. She described that vehicle as being a maroon GMC with a temporary plate. She told her partner, and their scout car pulled behind a vehicle fitting that description. The vehicle was eventually stopped on Gratiot. The driver was ordered out. The passenger was also ordered out and detained. Officer Hudgens identified the defendant, Mr. Morlet, as being the passenger of that vehicle. She said other officers were also at that location. She described Mr. Morlet as having some faded blue jeans and a New York hat pinned around his neck. She said that he was taken into custody by her, and she looked inside of the vehicle, the passenger side of that vehicle, where she observed a gun under the passenger seat. She also described seeing a spent shell casing under the windshield wiper on the outside of the vehicle. She described the gun as being silver and black, and it was .40 caliber. And the casing in the windshield was also .40 caliber. She testified that the evidence technicians placed those items on evidence. She made the gun safe and placed it on evidence number ending in 80009, item 3. She clarified that the gun was found under the front passenger seats. The court also heard from Sergeant Ford, who has been with Detroit Police Department for 26 years. He's currently assigned to the homicide unit, and he was working on June 6, 2020. He said that he went to a location of Lakeview in the city of Detroit, and he extracted video from cameras at a home located at 5221 Lakeview. He observed that there were cameras on the outside of that house and made contact with the owner. The video system had a timestamp that was about 5 minutes fast. He pulled that video and he made still photographs from that video. People's number 2, which was a still photo from 5221 Lakeview, was admitted into evidence. And particularly the time was 8:16:55 p.m. on June 6th of this year. The court observed that evidence, and it was a picture of a maroon Burgundy SUV in the street. The court learned that it was a DVR night owl system which captured the recording. The court also heard from Detective Lisa Johnson, who has been a detective for 4 years. She's the officer in charge of the case. She's been with the Detroit Police Department for 22 years. She interviewed the defendant at the Detroit Detention Center. She said that interview was recorded. Detective Lang and Detective Mack were there at the interview. The court know if there was a motion to admit people's nine, which was the constitutional rights form. Terrence Morlet had been advised of his rights on June 9th at 4:15 p.m. and he appeared to be normal. However, he looked or appeared tired. His signature and initials were at the bottom of that document. After having been advised of his constitutional rights, Mr. Morlett was shown People's Number 2, where he indicated that the vehicle in that photograph looked like his vehicle. Detective Johnson testified that she also did some research and learned of a number that was associated with Mr. Morlett, phone number being 313-784-5378. She searched clear and found that number. However, learned of cross-examination that the number was associated with a person by the name of, or last name of Cook. No, it was registered to someone by the name of Cook, but it was associated with Mr. Morlett. Based on that phone number, Detective Johnson got a search warrant for the CDR, which is the call detail record, and provided that information to Detective Smelter, who received the records. Detective Smelter prepared a report. Detective Smelter testified that he has been with DPD for 20 years. He's had 90 hours of training analyzing cell phone data and mapping. And he's testified approximately 8 times prior to today. He uploaded onto Penland some information, and People's Number 6 was admitted into record, which consisted of a report where there were 26 calls, a map of an area placed by the phone, and some type of animation video. The phone number that this report was tied to was 313-784-5378. Based on that report, Detective Smelter looked at a date of June 6th of this year at about 27 hours, which was 8:27 p.m. And he was able to place the phone associated with that number ending in 5378 to the area of a homicide located on Lakeview Street. Court heard from Brian Grabowski, who works with the Mission State Police. He's a forensic scientist. He was admitted as an expert in the area of firearm and tool marking. He received a lot of evidence from the Detroit Police Department. And the case associated with the evidence ended in 0324. He described the evidence that he recovered, and he tested some of that evidence, which consisted of a .40 caliber a gun, and a fired bullet, and a .40 caliber casing. It was his conclusion and expertise that the .40 caliber was fired from the gun that was examined in item number 2. In item number 7, that item was also fired from the gun that was examined. Mr. Morlett is charged in count 1 with homicide, murder, first degree, premeditated. This is a circumstantial case, but based on the circumstances, all the circumstances, given the phone number associated with him and where it was at the time of the murder, the weapon that was discovered 2 days later in a vehicle that he told the police was his, not from the photograph, but a vehicle of similar make that he said he owned, and then later testified or stated that the vehicle in Peoples 2 looked like his vehicle, the court believes the people have met their burden and proven by a probable cause standard that he did deliberately with the intent to kill and with premeditation, kill and murder one Raymond Mallory. The court in count 2 also believes that the people have met their burden by a probable cause standard and proving by that standard that he did make an assault upon Rashawn Spiller with the intent to commit the crime of murder. In count 3, Mr. Morlett is charged with weapons, firearms, possession by felon. Based on the stipulation and the weapon that was recovered in the vehicle on June 8th, the court believes that the people have met their burden in proving by a probable cause standard that he did possess a firearm when and eligible to do so because he had previously been convicted of the felony and had now restored his rights to possess a firearm on the date in question. As to count 4, weapons carried concealed, the court believes the people have met their burden in proving by a probable cause standard that Mr. Morlett did in fact carry a dangerous weapon, that being a pistol, while it was being concealed in a vehicle operated by Mr. Morlett. And as it relates to count 5 through 7, each being associated with the homicide, assault with intent to murder, possession by a felon, the court believes that there was a firearm that was used in the commission of the homicide, the AWIM, and possession by a felon. And therefore, there has been a sufficient showing of evidence to show that, or for probable cause standards as it relates to those counts. So he will be found over on all the charges contained in the information. His arraignment date will be a week from today, which is January 14th at 9 a.m. Is there anything further?
That's on the table, thank you.
Thank you.
No, sir. But I'll stay there. Okay.
That's enough for everyone.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Everybody stay safe.
All right, thank you for calling.
Oh, Shannon Walker, yes, yes.
Okay, so is that one of her dates, no, every judge has in custody today?
That's a good question.
All right, because that's gonna have to go.
Yeah, I'll try to give the court a call tomorrow and.
Let me know, because I have another matter that day. Judge Heisen,